What's going on, friends? When it comes to putting some money into your motorcycle and getting more power out of it, there's a couple of very common questions that always come up. One is, what's this going to do to my fuel economy on the bike? And two, is this going to reduce the longevity of my motorcycle? Or sometimes when people ask me, is it a good idea? I've got X number of miles to go ahead and put a cam in my bike. These are all very valid questions, and today I want to take a look at some of them and see if we can dispel some myths and hopefully kind of shed some light on what you can and can't do with your bike and what's going to happen when you do it. Now, obviously, you can do anything you want to your motorcycle. It's your motorcycle. You've bought it. You've paid for it. You own it. So it's yours to do whatever you want to do with it. But if you're going to spend the big bucks and put in big bore kits, cams, you're going to tune it, you're going to take it to a dyno tuner, you're going to do all these things, it's going to cost you some money. Now, obviously, you don't want to spend all that money on your bike and have it blow up in your face. Then on the same side of the coin, if you're just looking for a little more power, but you don't want to completely kill your fuel economy, which, as we all know right now, fuel economy is kind of a very important thing with the price of gas. But the number one thing that we've got to remember when it comes to performance upgrades is that you are literally, in most cases, unless you go to the extreme, you're making the engine more efficient. But before we get too far into the video today, guys, please don't forget to hit that like button if you enjoyed the video, and consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already. By hitting that like button, you are telling YouTube, you're telling that algorithm that you enjoyed the video, and you can help us get this content recommended to others. So as you all are very aware, if you go out and you get a new Harley or even a stock Harley, they are really down on power. I mean, they pull pretty good, they feel pretty good, but they're nowhere where they need to be. Now, the new Milwaukee 8s, they do feel pretty good stock, but those bikes were really designed to run on the leaner air-fuel ratios, not so much like the twin cams, which were already too lean from the factory in the very beginning. Now, you've probably heard myself say, and many others out there, the best thing you could ever do to your bike is get a tune on it. Well, when we always say when you're getting a tune, you're putting more fuel into the motorcycle to help cool it off. Well, right there, that's kind of a red flag. You're thinking, well, I put more fuel in the bike, my fuel economy is going to drop. Well, not necessarily. You're just putting in a little bit more fuel in your cruise range to help cool the motorcycle off. Now, obviously, when you hit the throttle, it's going to pour on the fuel, and the faster you go, the higher the RPMs rise, the richer that air-fuel mixture ratio is going to get as you get higher in the RPMs up on the map. Now, when it comes to big bore kits and cams, we start adding things like that. Obviously, we're going to have to retune the motorcycle and tell it, hey, we've got more air coming in, which requires a little bit more fuel. Once again, this really would lead you to believe that you're going to be losing fuel economy. Now, honestly, let's just get this out of the way now. When it comes to losing fuel economy with a decently mild performance build, it's all right here. I mean, I get it. I know my fuel economy suffers when I do a build and I ride the bike because I can't get enough of this. So obviously, that's going to drink your fuel. So when you've made the engine more powerful and more efficient, you're going to be producing more horsepower and more torque at any given RPM. Basically, in a fuel-injected bike, any given throttle position. We can take a look at some dyno graphs, and this will kind of show you. You look at the comparisons here, you can see, look at each RPM going up, you're actually making more power per that given RPM, which is actually less throttle, which in turn is using less fuel. So that's just my thoughts on performance builds and fuel economy. Now, obviously, if you go out and build a 124-inch twin cam, monster injectors, monster throttle body, yeah, you're probably going to see a little bit of reduction in fuel economy from where you were with a more close to stock bike, no matter what you do in the throttle. But for most basic builds, heads, cams, decent compression, maybe a big bore kit, good exhaust and a tune, all dialed in properly, you're not going to really have any issues with fuel economy whatsoever. Now, on the flip side of the fuel economy, let's talk about some longevity. Am I going to hurt my motorcycle by going and doing a performance build on an otherwise stock bike? Now, a lot of you are probably aware about the pressed crankshaft situation with Harley Davidsons. Yes, there have been some failures out there. Yes, there can be some issues associated with those cranks, but even though they are pressed, what we do have to remember is that these things are pressed with like 20 tons of force, and they're robotically pressed, so honestly, once they're pressed, they're straight as a string. One of the issues with the pressed cranks, though, that Harley found out was if they actually tried to balance them, they would actually make it worse. So putting it into the twin cam, and even now the Milwaukee 8s, where they don't have those tapered roller bearings, they engineered all that slop into the bike. The cranks, in my opinion, are actually pretty good and pretty decent. Just that automatic primary chain tensioner ratcheting up that one side, to me, that could tend to throw it out of alignment over time. Now that the crank talk's out of the way, let's talk about what we could realistically do on top of a stock Harley Davidson crank. Well, number one, I always like to check that pinion run out over on the pinion side when you got the cam chest open. That's going to tell you a lot about the health and condition of your crank. Ideally, you want to be 2/1000ths or less, but that's more of a tapered bearing measurement. So I would say 5/1000ths or less on a pressed crank is a pretty safe bet to go ahead and put something on top of it. And another thing I like to look at is a decent guideline to go by for what we could do to a bike on top of a stock crank is look at the Screamin Eagle Stage 4 kits. How much power is Harley Davidson putting on top of their factory cranks? They're saying these are the bolt-on kits, you can run them, and you're good to go. Generally, I would say up to around or below 120 horsepower. I would really try to stay below that mark. Torque, same thing, roughly about 120. That's just my personal opinion. I think that's what you can get away with on a pressed crank. Now, the other thing we really got to remember about the pressed cranks is that Harley Davidson does not want you to lug the engine. You really don't want to lug a Harley Davidson engine, period, in the story, no matter what crank you have. Because when you do a big, heavy-duty build, you are putting more stress on that bottom end. And the best way to avoid actually shifting the flywheels on the crank pin is not to lug the engine. I mean, there are some people out there that claim they can shift a crank out of alignment on command just by lugging the engine. To me, that's hard to imagine with 20 tons of force when you've pressed a crank together with that much force, but I'm not ruling it out as being totally impossible. But the best thing to remember is just don't lug the motor, don't risk it, especially if you put a lot of money into it on top of a factory crankshaft. Now, as far as performance building goes on a stock crankshaft and reducing the longevity of the engine, you're generally pretty safe if you do all the supporting parts. Now, bolt-in cams, it's a good idea to go ahead and upgrade the cam plate and oil pump, but just a direct bolt-in cam, I would go ahead and change the cam bearings and put in a good set of lifters, but that's really a judgment call at that point. If it's pretty low mile motor, you could get away with just reusing the factory lifters or the stock lifters, whatever came in it, and you could get away with using your cam bearings. But you got to remember, everything mechanical breaks, and there's really no indicator sometimes of if or when it's going to break. Yeah, we can look at a lifter, we can spin it, we can check it, there's no marks in it, it spins free, everything's good. We put in a bolt-in cam, and it starts ticking in about 5,000 miles. Could we attribute it to the new cam? Possibly. But there's really no way to say for certain. But generally, when it comes to performance parts, if you do the supporting measures to it, now, I'm not saying you have to go down to the crankshaft, but what I am saying is that you do want to measure your pinion run out and kind of get an idea what the health of your crankshaft is by that run out. That run out's going to tell you quite a bit. Now, obviously, if it's knocking and banging, making noises, probably not a good idea to dump money into performance parts. You probably ought to get that thing tore down and figure out what's going on first. But if all your supporting parts are added and everything's done correctly, if you're doing a higher lift cam, go ahead and get the cam plate, go ahead and get the oil pump. Put those supporting parts in there that go with it. Now, obviously, if you're doing a big bore kit, chances are you're going to be doing the camshaft as well, because really wouldn't gain you a whole lot or benefit you much in any way to not do the camshaft. But putting all that together, you're going to ride the bike just like you normally would ride, unless you're just beating on it or you're not taking care of it. Those are really the only things that's going to reduce your motorcycle's longevity and end up shelling that engine out a lot sooner than you would like. Case in point, there's a lot of guys that put 120R, Screamin Eagle twin cam 120Rs in touring bikes. They ride them on the daily. The hell, they ride them across the USA. No problems. But once again, even with that engine, we hear some success stories with those motors, and we hear some absolute horror stories. It's a complete roll of the dice. just the same thing when it comes to, let's take the 131 crate engine, for example. People are claiming to have a lot of issues with the crate motor bought from Harley Davidson. But there have been less issues reported with Stage 4 kits, the 131 Stage 4 kit, actually installed on a Milwaukee 8 at the dealer. Now, I have my opinions on this. You're getting just the factory slapped together engine versus a technician at the dealership that actually cares and takes the time to make sure everything's right, and he builds that with all of his heart and soul for you, if you get a good one. So guys, couple things to take away from the video today. One, performance builds on your Harley, they're not really going to hurt your fuel economy if they're dialed in and tuned properly, and you go easy on the throttle and don't enjoy that power all the time if you're worried about fuel economy. If you're not worried about fuel economy, feel free to enjoy it all the time. And number two, a performance build really isn't going to reduce the longevity of the engine. A performance build is going to make it more efficient. You're actually putting in stouter parts when you build them up. So if you think about that, you build it right, it's going to be built for the long haul, and your investment isn't going to be a total waste. So anyhow, guys, I hope that answered some questions for you, and I just want to put some of my thoughts out there for you when it came to fuel economy and longevity of engines on performance builds. I've had a lot of questions about that, and I hope it really helped you out. But anyhow, guys, that's all I've got for you today. If you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to hit that like button and consider subscribing to the channel. But until next week, you guys stay safe on the streets, dodge the cars, and I'll catch you guys back here next week with a brand new video. Thanks for watching.